Heard every week on the various amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the U.S., and we were one of the first podcasts on the Internet. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the Earth as we come to air with edition number 1388 of This Week in Amateur Radio. Due to the government shutdown, the Federal Communications Commission is offline. We will tell you all the details on how the shutdown is affecting amateur radio. Ham radio influencers across the Internet are helping to get the amateur radio emergency preparedness legislation passed in Congress. Amateur radio operators activate during recent hurricanes Imelda and Humberto. The FCC issues a notice of violation to an amateur for unauthorized one-way transmissions. A newly licensed amateur is charged by the FCC with unauthorized operation on a public service band. Equatorial Guinea amateurs are still off the air. Meanwhile, Italian amateurs are granted access to 40 MegaHertz. The AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act is slowly making its way through Congress. The simulated emergency test is coming up nationwide this month. A New Zealand weather radar site takes a direct lightning hit. The FCC has approved cell phone jamming in prisons. And a teenage ham has now been added to one of the most sought-after de-expeditions. We will introduce you to him and tell you where he is going in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLEB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will attempt to answer the question, where's the fun in that? Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another brand new edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us back to 1923 to see how amateurs were investigating all sorts of things, including Aurora and even de-expeditions. This will be part one of the story entitled High Latitudes and Low Wavelengths. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B, in the popular DX Corner, with all the latest news on de-expeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio just outside of Albany, New York, where we are having an unusual October heat wave, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Sandwich, Illinois, where it's been hot and dry for far too long, but we've got some relief coming soon, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
And reporting from our news bureau this week, from station K2MST inside the Museum of Science and Technology in downtown Syracuse, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting live from the warm and humid Space Coast in Florida, I am Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where we're just reaching our peak fall foliage season, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our ham radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the green is turning to gold as the autumn leaves come tumbling down, and Indian summer began after our first frost last Wednesday, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where summer and autumn are preparing for their annual battle, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Leading off our news this week is how the U.S. government shutdown is affecting amateur radio. A bulletin sent to members of ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, included information about the impact of the United States government shutdown on licensing for the amateur radio service. The government shutdown began at 12:01 Eastern Time on Wednesday, October 1st, 2025, when Congress had not passed an appropriations bill or other plan to keep the government funded for the new fiscal year beginning October 1st. Here with more details on how the shutdown affects amateur radio, we go to League headquarters for this report from John Ross, KD8 IDJ.
Federal Communications Commission, which issues amateur radio service licenses, issued a public notice on Tuesday, September 30th, indicating that it would suspend most operations following a shutdown. The FCC notice said, aside from a few emergency and auction filing systems, all other Commission electronic filing systems will be unavailable to the public until normal agency operations resume. ARRL Volunteer Examiner Coordinator Manager Maria Soma, AB1FM, said the FCC systems appeared to go offline about 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, and they are redirecting to the public notice. This means the FCC will not be processing any amateur radio license applications during the shutdown, which includes individual, club, and exam sessions, new and upgrade applications. But ARRL volunteer examiners should continue giving exam sessions, said Soma. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep serving new and upgraded candidates for amateur radio licenses. Soma also urged that volunteer examiners continue to promptly forward session results from their exams to the ARRL VEC. Please do not hold on to your session results. Send your sessions to us, and ARRL VEC will continue to queue all applications as they are received. Once the federal government reopens, ARRL VEC will promptly resume submitting applications to the FCC for processing, so keep sending sessions to the ARRL VEC. The FCC shutdown notice indicate that CORE's registration system would remain available for certain activities, but new registrations are not currently being accepted. This means that new applicants cannot register for an FRN. This has created a temporary barrier for individuals who wish to take the amateur radio exam but do not yet have an FRM. Existing users can still log in and access their accounts, and applicants who already have an FRN can test without issue. Given the current situation, there is active discussion within the testing community about temporarily allowing testing without an FRN, with the understanding that the applicant would take the exam and receive a certificate of successful completion of the examination, and then once CORES resumes issued new registration, the applicant would register for an FRN, contact the coordinator VEC with their FRN, and have their application submitted retroactively. This approach would preserve momentum for new licensees and avoid delays in testing, and please continue to check the ARRL website for updates as they become available. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The FCC's Universal Licensing System, or ULS, databases are also currently unavailable to the public. ULS and related systems like the License Manager, License Search, Application Search, etc., are not accessible during the shutdown. Users cannot file applications with the FCC or access license data, including address information. The ARRL VEC program has a long-standing tradition of serving the amateur radio service and the Federal Communications Commission with integrity and expertise. As the largest VEC in the nation, the ARRL VEC operates as a knowledgeable information source for a wide range of licensing services and issues. The ARRL VEC supports nearly 30,000 ARRL-accredited volunteer examiners who support the amateur radio community by offering exam opportunities.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
There is momentum to involve every radio amateur in ARRL's grassroots campaign to pass the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act. For all the details, we go to League headquarters, where John Ross, KD8 IDJ, files this special report.
Hosts from popular amateur radio YouTube channels have engaged their subscribers to learn more about the legislation, and some have even hosted ARRL leaders for interviews on their shows. A common theme is how easy it is and how easy ARRL has made it for every ham to send letters to Congress. Go to www.arrl.org/HOA and click Send Your Letters. Then enter your call sign and push the Send My Letters button. It's just that easy. ARRL CEO David Minster, NA2AA, was the guest on Ham Radio Crash Course, interviewed by Josh Nash, KI6NAZ. That program was streamed live on September 18th, 2025. Jason Johnston, KC5HWB, has just finished a series of videos for his 30 Days of Ham Radio project on his channel, Ham Radio 2.0. For Day 25, September 25th, Johnson produced an in-depth breakdown of H.R. 1094 and S-459, the bipartisan bill supported by ARRL's campaign. You can watch what ARRL's latest move means for your radio amateur future. Imagine being told you can't even put a small antenna on your property, said Hayden Honeywood, VK7HH, in the opening of his video for Ham Radio DX, published on September 29th. Hayden comes to viewers from Tasmania, Australia, and he is also a U.S. licensee, KD9SSB. Not in the backyard, not on the roof, and not even hidden in a tree. For thousands of American hams, that's the reality under HOA rules. Brett Glass, W57BG, and Glenn Popeil, KW5GP, interviewed ARRL West Gulf Division Director John Robert Stratton, NA5AUS, on September 23rd. Stratton emphasized the importance of getting every ham to send a letter. You can see that discussion on YouTube, listen to it on Podbean, or view it on Facebook. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
One addition to the list is Tim Duffy, K3LR, also hosted Stratton on DX Engineering's Weekend Special for September 26th. During the 15-minute live stream, Stratton answered questions from viewers about the work ARRL has already accomplished to secure congressional sponsors for the bills.
Amateur radio operators were closely involved with monitoring the forecast of the National Hurricane Center in Florida throughout the tracks of Hurricanes Imelda and Humberto, activating nets and contributing surface reports. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with more.
Imelda passed over Bermuda on Wednesday night, October 1st, 2025, as a Category 2 hurricane, with winds gusting over 100 miles per hour and leaving over 17,000 people without power. Bermuda is no longer, though, under a tropical storm warning. And as of this report, forecasters are still tracking Imelda, now a post-tropical cyclone, as it moves away from Bermuda, according to the National Hurricane Center. The Hurricane WatchNet HWN activated for the first time this season, beginning Wednesday, October 1st at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The National Hurricane Center amateur radio station, WX4NHC, was active until approximately midnight Eastern Time on Wednesday, reported W4NHC amateur radio assistant coordinator Julio Rapol, WD4R. The Hurricane Center monitored the HWN as well as the VoIP Hurricane Net. A report from Rob Macedo, KD1CY, the Director of Operations for the VoIP Hurricane Net, indicated the net was activated at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Wednesday until it was secured at 2 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Thursday. We monitored numerous weather stations and social media during Imelda, said Macedo. At least one report received on the net was used in an advisory capacity. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The double hurricanes have produced dangerous surf and coastal flooding along the U.S. East Coast, and they caused damage to homes on North Carolina's Outer Banks. The National Hurricane Center is also encouraging surface reports, including weather data, flooding, and damage, to be shared with the hurricane nets using any of the available modes, including WindLink and online reports. WX4 and HC accepts reports via its online hurricane weather report forms. Available are at fiu.edu. Macedo thanked Mark Snyder, AE4WX, and Lloyd Colston, KC5FM, for their net control support. He also recognized Dennis Dura, K2DCD, and Colston for posts made on the Bermuda Radio Society Facebook pages and other areas to notify people in the affected areas of their net activation. The NHC is watching two additional lows in the Atlantic, projecting a 10% chance of development in the next 7 days. We will continue to monitor them, said Macedo.
The Federal Communications Commission has issued a notice of violation to Mike F. Conti of Naples, Florida, citing alleged rule violations relating to unauthorized transmissions and refusal to allow station inspection. The FCC notice by the Regional Director of Region 1 was released on September 29, 2025, and includes that Conte holds an amateur radio's license of KA2FPZ. According to the notice, FCC Enforcement Bureau agents from the New York Field Office conducted an investigation on March 17th. Using direction-finding techniques, they located and monitored transmissions on 7.200 MegaHertz emanating from a residence owned by Conte in Brookfield, Connecticut, that appeared to be one-way broadcasts originating from KA2FPZ. According to the FCC, Conte was prepared to speak with the station he identified as KB2VBO, a call sign not currently assigned to any licensee. No station responded to the transmissions, and the notice included that the Conte later admitted to an agent that he was engaging in one-way communications that was neither allowed nor exempted under the rules. In addition to the alleged unauthorized broadcasting, the FCC reported that the agents were denied access to the residence in violation of the Commission's rules. The notice of violation outlines two specific rule violations: 47 CFR Part 97.103 Subpart C. The station licensee must make the station and the station records available for inspection on request by FCC. And 47 FCR Part 97.113 Subpart B. An amateur station shall not engage in any form of broadcasting, nor may an amateur station transmit one-way communications, except as specifically provided. The Commission ordered Conte to respond in writing within 20 days of the notice's release, providing a detailed explanation of the circumstances, the corrective actions taken, and a timeline for addressing any remaining issues. The FCC emphasized the notice does not preclude any further action if warranted.
In the U.S., the FCC has charged an amateur radio operator with unauthorized operation on a frequency assigned for use by public safety agencies, private mobile paging, and businesses. The FCC's action against Matthew Davidson, KG7EFI, stems from a complaint its Enforcement Bureau received on July 10th, barely 1 month after Davidson was granted his technician class license. Technician licensees are permitted use of VHF bands, including 6 meters, 2 meters, and 1.25 meters. According to the complaint, enforcement agents said Davidson, who lives in Utah, was questioned 18 days after the complaint and admitted that he was transmitting on 173.675 MegaHertz, a frequency that is unauthorized under his license. The FCC has given him 20 days to file a formal written response.
The 20th annual ARRL online auction, sponsored by RT Systems, is set for October 10th through the 16th, 2025. But you can get a sneak peek at the many offerings from October 7th through October 9th. There are over 200 items up for offering this year, with more coming in ahead of the launch. One of the more interesting items is an Optimod 9100B AM broadcast audio processor donated by Orban Labs. It was signed by company founder Bob Orban. The donation was made at the annual National Association of Broadcasters convention. Orban Labs has set the standard for audio processing in the broadcast industry for 50 years. Company founder Bob Orban was on hand to sign the cover plate, which makes this unique, vintage, and fully functional item a valuable collector's piece. Proceeds from the annual online auction benefit ARRL education programs. Bidders must register. Your ARRL user ID and password will not work on the auction site. If you have registered for a previous ARRL auction online, you may use the same login information this year. Find all the details on the league's website.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio. It is time for this month's Volunteer Monitor Program Report. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between the ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. This is the current activity report of the Volunteer Monitor Program. Technician operators in Florida and Georgia received advisories concerning 17-meter FT8 operation, a band on which technicians have no privileges. Technician operators in Florida, California, and Oregon received advisory notices concerning 20-meter FT8 operation, a band on which technicians also have no privileges. A commendation was issued to an operator in Ohio for exceptional work with the April 29, 2025 Skyward net on the Preble County 145.470 MegaHertz repeater. There was one virtual club presentation about the Volunteer Monitor Program, and the totals for this report's monitoring were 1,208 hours on HF frequencies and 1,668 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 2,876 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this month's report.
The National Aeronautics and Space Administration is seeking volunteers to passively track the 2026 Artemis II Orion spacecraft as the crewed mission travels to the Moon and back to Earth. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with further details.
The Artemis II test flight will send NASA astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Christina Koch, along with Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen, on an approximately 10-day mission around the Moon. Targeted for no later than April 2026, the mission will rely on NASA's Near Space Network and Deep Space Network for primary communications and tracking support through its launch, orbit, and reentry. However, with a growing focus on commercialization, NASA wants to further understand how the industry's tracking capabilities will work out. This collaboration opportunity builds upon a previous request released by NASA's Space Communication and Navigation Program, SCAN, during the Artemis I mission in 2022. 10 volunteers successfully tracked the uncrewed Orion spacecraft on its journey thousands of miles beyond the Moon and back. One of the volunteers tracking in 2022 was Scott Chapman, K4KDR of Montpelier, Virginia. Sometimes it's what you don't know that makes this kind of activity interesting, said Chapman. All I had was a small S-band dish and a receiver, and wasn't quite sure what I could or couldn't hear, but when I started hearing the signal, it made everything worth it. Chapman said he felt good about the whole process, and while it was interesting, it was also fun. There were also other participants during the Artemis I mission, including international space agencies, academic institutions, commercial companies, nonprofits, and private citizens who were also attempting to receive Orion signals. Chapman added that NASA is also looking for commercial partnerships to share in that process. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Once again, with their call signs, the Artemis II test flight will send NASA astronauts Reed Wiseman, KF5LKT, Victor Glover, KI5BKC, and Christina Koch, along with Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen, KF5LKU, on an approximately 10-day mission around the Moon. If you're interested in volunteering for next year's event, all of the information can be found at sam.gov. The response deadline is October 27, 2025, at 5 p.m. Eastern Time.
The National Conference of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators Question Pool Committee has announced the immediate removal of extra class question E6D07, that is Echo 6 Delta 07, from the Element 4 extra class question pool and from use on examinations. The decision was made after it was determined that the question contained more than one correct answer. The current Element 4 extra class pool, effective July 1, 2024, remains valid through June 30, 2028. All volunteer examiner coordinators and examiners are instructed to remove E6D07 from examination as soon as possible. Updated files reflecting this change are now available for download at the NCVEC website. The ARRL VEC advises the community to regularly check the National Conference of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators website for updates to the question pools, which may include errata and withdrawn questions.
Dennis Markell, November 1, India Mike Whiskey, has been appointed ARRL New Hampshire Section Manager effective October 1st, 2025. The role has been open since the term ended on June 30th, 2025. Markell is active with his local radio club and participates in Parks on the Air. He will serve for the remaining term, which ends on June 30th, 2027. The previous section manager was Peter Stower, Whiskey 1, Foxtrot Echo Alpha, who served from 2013 to 2019 and 2021 to 2025.
As we have been reporting for the past few weeks, the government of Equatorial Guinea temporarily has suspended all amateur radio license. This decision follows the revelation of a case involving a foreign amateur radio operator who gained access to sensitive areas with unauthorized equipment. The authorities are committed to establishing a new regulatory framework that guarantees effective control over the use of telecommunications frequencies and equipment in accordance with national security requirements. Meanwhile, Italian radio amateurs have been authorized to use the 40 MegaHertz band until the end of the year. They are allowed to operate at 40.660 MHz to 40.700 MHz with a maximum power of 10 watts. The Italian regulator has also given permission until December 31st for Italian amateurs to operate on 70.1, 70.2, and 70.3 MHz. And remember, you may be able to hear them, but you cannot work them.
The Make Operating Radio Easier or More project is an initiative to reduce both gender and age imbalances in amateur radio through education and hands-on activities. The ambitious goals of the More project, running through June 2026, are to train and license 500 new U.S. radio amateurs, to examine and explore various types of radio signals, such as by using software-defined radio, and to help our new hams learn basic communications protocols by observing and participating in HF and VHF operations. Amateur radio involves all of the aspects of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and can lead to degrees and occupations in these fields. While hams enjoy this lifelong hobby worldwide, they are also a critical part of local, national, and international emergency readiness, as their communications are possible even during severe infrastructure failures due to catastrophic circumstances. Our training course is provided in 6 sessions, typically one 2.5-hour session per week, and may be scheduled to occur virtually and/or in person. Students must have access to the Internet in order to view and download study materials and to participate in Zoom sessions using video and audio. Our students are also expected to study using the materials that we provide at least 1/2 hour per day during all 6 weeks of the More course. Our grant covers the costs of training, testing, and licensing students who have applied and been accepted into the More project. Students who attend and complete a More project-approved course, pass the amateur radio technician exam, and receive their call sign and license from the FCC will receive a handheld radio from the More project, plus additional coaching in how to get on the air. Resource materials can be found at the More Project resource page. The More project is supported by a grant from Amateur Radio Digital Communications.
Here is an update on a story we have been covering for well over 2 years now, the Help Save AM Radio in Your Car bill in Congress. And it would seem like the wheels of the U.S. Congress indeed turn slowly. However, this issue has not died and appears to be closer to passage in Washington. More than 2/3 of the U.S. House of Representatives have now signed on to co-sponsor the bill, seeking to block automakers from removing AM radios from new vehicles. A move supporters say is essential for public safety and emergency communications. As we come to air, the measure had attracted 296 co-sponsors in the House, easily surpassing the 2/3 threshold, with members from both parties lining up behind it. In the Senate, a companion bill has secured 61 co-sponsors, also demonstrating bipartisan support and giving the proposal strong momentum in both chambers. The push to preserve AM radio has also become a symbolic debate over technology, tradition, and safety. Lawmakers say the issue resonates with constituents who may not listen to AM daily but want it available when disaster strikes. Rural representatives have been especially vocal, pointing out that their districts rely heavily on AM signals that cut through terrain where line-of-sight FM and cell service is unreliable.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX as part of Ham Radio's oldest ham radio magazine on the air, This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Bill, AJ8B. As of this Saturday, there will be 81 days until Christmas. Time is flying, so we had better get started. From my ham friend Bob, I received the following question. Bill, I have heard you use the term work bands several times. What are those bands? Are they different than the other bands? Well, Bob, that's a really solid question. The WARC 79 bands refer to three specific amateur radio frequency allocations that were established during the World Administrative Radio Conference, or WARC, W-A-R-C, held in Geneva in '79. These bands were created to expand the available bands to amateur radio operators worldwide. The WARC 79 bands are 30 meters, 17 meters, and 12 meters. These bands were allocated specifically for amateur radio use and are notable for being contest-free zones due to their narrow bandwidth. This makes them ideal for non-contesting communication, especially during international contests. They are important to hams for several reasons. First, they represent a global agreement to support amateur radio. Secondly, they offer unique propagation characteristics, especially during solar maximums, like right now. Finally, they are often used for DXing, long-distance communications, and for the digital modes. Well, that's a great question, Bob. Thanks for sending it into the dxmentor@gmail.com. If you've never tried 30 meters or 17 meters, you really should put that on your list of things to get done. And if you're interested in 12 at all, you need to take advantage of it over the next several years because once the solar minimum hits, 12's gone. Each week I try to focus on those entities that will be available in the next 7 days. There's so much data to sift through that I thought a focus on the next week might be helpful. Here's what you should find QRV when you tune the bands. And I have to warn you, there's suddenly a lot of stuff going on. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just do what several other listeners have done and send me an email at thedxmentor@gmail.com and I'll get you fixed up. Well, we're going to start off with some good and bad news. First, the bad news. From the 3 Charlie 2 Mike Delta DXpedition team to Equatorial Guinea, we received the following. Dear friends, we sadly announced to the amateur radio community that 3 Charlie 2 Mike Delta, a long-awaited expedition to Equatorial Guinea, will be postponed to unknown future dates because a sudden stop to all amateur radio licenses declared by the local government. The reason of that decision has been to, quote, to deal with problems the license granted to 2 foreign citizens have created. According to local news, they tried to operate from, quote, a sensitive part of the country without all the necessary permissions in the early part of September. Because of their behavior, the 2 foreigners have been obliged to stop their radio operations, so they decided to go back home earlier than they planned. Understandably, the local government suspended all the licenses with this aim of revising the procedure of requesting the permission of operating from the country. So, a few days ago, we received the ORTEL from the local agency of telecom, the official communication that the license to our expedition, even if we fulfilled all the administrative requests, was suspended until new government decision was made. We regret the situation, but we are sure that all the people who were waiting for us on the air will understand that there is not any responsibility on our side of this unexpected outcome. We are contacting all supporters, corporate, association, and individuals to refund them. We will be back very soon with more details. Thank you. And that comes from Aunt, I8KHC-3 Charlie 2 Mike Delta team leader. And you know, if you listen to our podcast, A lot of times we talk about all the challenges these guys face, whether it's sickness or mosquitoes or insects or walruses and penguins or ice or superheat. And we've, of course, had some where soldiers have shown up and arrested people until they got it straightened out. Well, here's another danger in that while you're there, the whole thing can get shut down. Here's some good news. Early next year, San Felix and San Ambrosio Islands will be activated. XQ7IR Philippe says that, quote, after having a successful and exciting expedition last month as 3 Golf 1 Papa, I am pleased to report that San Ambrosio, which is CE0 X-ray, project continues with important progress in the mission to put this exciting and very rare entity on the air. Indeed, San Felix Island is number 3 on Club Log's DXCC Most Wanted list. Gutierrez says that he participated in 2 meetings with the authorities responsible for granting permits and authorizations for this DXpedition to the Desadventurous Islands. Quote, the authorized dates for this DXpedition will be between January 12th and February 15th of 2026, which represents at least 25 days of operation on the island, end quote, he says. Permits and authorizations will be issued by the appropriate authorities weeks before the DXpedition begins and will then be sent to the ARL and the Northern California DX Foundation for validation and approval for DXCC. Operation will be 160 meters through 6 meters, CW, sideband, and FT8. PY7RP Renner will lead the remote team in their efforts to put into operation a 24/7 CW/FT8 remote station. Tim, M0URX, will serve as QSL managers, and you can check out the M0URX website for more details. Cesar, VE3LYC, will serve as senior advisor to the team. More than 78% of the equipment, tools, and supplies required for this operation have been acquired and will begin shipping in the coming weeks to Robinson Crusoe Island, which is CE0Z, which will be the departure point for San Ambrosia Island. More details will follow. And I'm excited about this because in my 50 years of DXing, I've never heard either of these islands on the air. And I'm sure they were a couple times, but never heard them, so I can't wait for it. And here's a little bit more good news. Belarus will be authorizing 6-meter operation for its highest class licenses, Class A amateur radio ticket. Amateur radio license holders in Belarus soon will be able to obtain authorization to operate on the 6-meter band. On September 23rd, the Belarusian National Inspection for Electrical Communications issued an official statement announcing that the 50 to 52 megahertz frequency range has been allocated to the amateur and amateur satellite services. More information in the Belarusian language is available on their website. CHAMP E21EIC is QRV as E21EIC/8 from his hometown in southern Thailand until October 9th, and QSL Champ via his home call E21EIC and Logbook of the World. Casimir S79/DL2 SBY is QRV with verticals and inverted Vs until October 12th. He will also be using a 5-element Yagi on 6 meters. Logs will be uploaded in Club Log LOTW, and you can also send direct to his QTH for QSL cards at DL2 SBY. As a reminder, Hotel Alpha 5 Alpha Oscar, Pista, is QRV from Uganda until October 10th. He is using CW sideband and FT8 on 80 through 6 meters. And you can QSL him via his home call, HA50A, preferably using OQRS. Bob ZL1RX is QRV from Ifate until October 10th, primarily on 6 meters, with some EME and a little 10 meters too. You can QSL direct to his QTH in New Zealand using Club Log OQRS. From the V6 Delta DXpedition to Micronesia, we have this update. Quote, after a week's delay, we were able to pick up our missing luggage at TKK Airport on Monday. The wire beam and the fifth station were set up on the same day. Unfortunately, the good conditions on the high bands now seem to be over. All antennas have good takeoff to Europe, the USA, Central America, and Japan. Out of consideration for other guests at the resort, however, the antennas had to be set up in a very confined space, what sometimes caused interference between them. This is particularly disruptive in poor conditions. We are QRV on all bands now from 160 to 6, except for 60 meters. At the halfway point after 1 week, we've logged over 50,000 QSOs. The team is in good spirits. The internet is not always stable. However, we are unable to respond to the many emails with log inquiries, comments, and requests. Please note that the live stream does not replace Club Log as the logging mechanism. After a QSO, please wait at least 24 hours for the next correct log update. From October 4th to October 27th, we have an activation in Burkina Faso, XT2AW. The Ohio Penn DX Bulletin reports that DF2WO Harold is wrapping up his 9 X-Ray 2 Alpha Whiskey activity in Rwanda and will be on the air as XT2AW from Burkina Faso, October 4th to the 27th. Per CuraZid.com, he will operate on holiday style on 160 through 10 meter CW, sideband, FT8, and FT4, as well as the QO100 satellite. The DX Mentor features a new podcast this weekend, a discussion with K4OGO Salty Walt on his DX journey and his new antenna book, quote, Salty Walt's Portable Antenna Sketchbook, end quote. Check it out. It was an absolutely enjoyable conversation, and the book is really, really cool. It's unlike any other technical book I've had, so you need to check it out online at least. And if you are interested in DX Podcast and YouTube channels, you should check out the DX Mentor Facebook page and subscribe to it to be kept up to date on all of our DX activities. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Welcome to the 44th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our appreciation goes out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for giving us permission to use his website in the presentation of these segments. Now, come along with us as we bring you the next chapter of Ham Radio History. High latitudes and low wavelengths. Donald B. McMillan, an experienced Arctic explorer and geologist, visited Hartford in early 1923 to discuss amateur radio with Hiram Percy Maxim. Among his various scientific investigations, McMillan was planning to study the aurora borealis. No one yet understood what the aurora was, but he had experienced it on previous trips and noticed that he could hear long-wave radio signals through it. On his next expedition, besides photographing the aurora, he wanted to experiment with shortwave radio signals to see whether they were affected by it. And, perhaps influenced by the broadcasting boom, he intended to use radio for more than scientific work alone. He believed it might also help combat the loneliness of a long Arctic winter camp and its damaging effects on crew morale. Just hearing voices and music from the civilized world would be a big boost. Two-way contact would be huge. McMillan was in town to ask Maxim for help from the ARRL during the expedition and to select an amateur radio operator to join his crew. The plan began to take shape almost immediately. The expedition would be on the air beginning on 20 June, identifying itself with the call sign WNP for Wireless North Pole. Although the shipboard station was licensed to use any wavelength its operator chose, they planned to operate between 200 and 300 meters, still considered short wave. After considering a list of candidates to accompany the expedition, the ARRL board chose Donald H. Mix, 1TS, of Bristol, Connecticut, who was then interviewed by McMillan and accepted as a member of his crew. A longtime major contributor to the Calls Heard section in QST, Mix was well known as a skilled operator and active league member. Among his many accomplishments, he had earned the distinction of having copied the most West Coast stations of any other amateur in New England. A graduate of Bristol High School, Mix was employed by the C.D. Tuska Company in Hartford, ARRL co-founder Clarence Tuska's company, as head of the assembly department. It's therefore no wonder that when he agreed to go on the trip, his employment situation would not be an issue. At age 21, never before having been on a sea voyage of any kind, much less one to the Arctic, Mix would confront new challenges daily. And as an amateur radio operator, he would have to deal with operating conditions never before experienced by anyone, working through perpetual daylight for the first few weeks and sometimes through aurora. Back home, the League's job would be to regularly make contact with WNP and relay news stories sent by Mix to a syndicate of 70 newspapers called the North American Newspaper Alliance, NANA. Macmillan's schooner, the 80-foot Bowden, named after Bowden College, his alma mater, would carry 2,000 gallons of fuel, giving it the longest range under power of any sailing vessel in the world, about 1,000 miles. The ship would navigate a course north along the western shore of Greenland and across Baffin Bay to anchor at Flagler Bay in late August, where it would spend the next 9 months frozen in the Arctic winter ice. At 79 degrees north latitude, the location was about 540 miles northeast of the magnetic pole and 700 miles from the geographic pole. Macmillan had chosen this spot to support his scientific mission to study geomagnetic effects and local wildlife. If all went as planned, the following summer thaw would permit their return by September 1924. The expedition's radio equipment was designed by M.B. West, 9BA, well known before the war as 8AEZ. West had resigned his civilian job with the Navy to join the Chicago Radio Lab, recently renamed Zenith. He visited the Bowden at its dock in Southport, Maine, to take measurements, acting as tailor for his new radio outfit. The equipment was then hand-assembled by West and other amateurs at Zenith, the company founded by R.H.G. Matthews, whose call sign 9ZN had inspired its new name. "It is a ham party," observed ARRL Secretary Matt Warner, especially with the rest of the ARRL to communicate with. Although other polar expeditions had carried radio equipment, none had yet succeeded in using it effectively. This one would be different. WNP was equipped with a Zenith Model 1R receiver covering shortwaves from 150 to 850 meters and a long-wave set for receiving naval stations NAA and NSS. Its transmitter was a two-tube circuit running 100 watts designed to tune into antennas that were shorter than normal, limited by the size of the ship. All units were built as proper furniture with panels of mahoganite radion and cabinets of piano-finished mahogany. The station's daisy-chain power supply consisted of a 500-watt Telefunken 500-cycle alternator, which was driven by a DC motor, which drew current from the ship's 160-ampere-hour automotive batteries, which were kept charged by a pair of 350-watt Delco light plants, a kind of fuel-power generator used at the time in rural areas for lighting. In addition, the plate voltage for the vacuum tubes was supplied by a separate set of batteries. The Burgess Battery Company of Madison, Wisconsin, plucked their best 1,000 cells from a 10,000-unit manufacturing run and delivered them to the expedition in special waterproof packages, all free of charge. These would last 18 months, longer than would be necessary, but as a contingency, Burgess also supplied tools, parts, and chemicals for them to construct new batteries from scratch to last an additional 2 years. The radio equipment was first tested altogether in Chicago, where the engineers found they would easily work several distant stations, including 1AW in Connecticut and 6KA in California, all on a short antenna. West and the Zenith crew then installed it on board the Bowden on 31 May and were on the air signing WNP. The company also stocked the ship with enough spare parts to completely replace the receivers and most of the parts in the transmitter and power plant should that become necessary. Mix planned to operate on 185, 220, and 300 meters, with the primary wavelength being 220. He would be on the air every night, closely rationing operating time to conserve fuel. Macmillan intended to send weekly reports which the ARRL would then relay to the News Alliance. Mix would also log all calls he heard and include the list in his reports. Amateurs who received reports were instructed to mail them to a NANA member newspaper immediately and then send a copy to ARRL. Messages marked urgent, used only for emergencies, were to be telephoned or telegraphed to an NANA newspaper immediately. As the Bowen set sail on 23 June for her 14-month voyage, Maxim was present to see the expedition off at its dock in Wiscasset, Maine. Shortly afterwards, Vermilia 1ZE was assigned to receive the first news dispatch for the newspapers. Despite bad weather in July, a half-dozen amateurs worked WNP, and perhaps twice that many heard its signals in the first couple of months. But communications worsened and then remained poor once they reached far enough north to experience the Arctic all-day summer sun in early August. Mix could hear and even log stations, but not work them. Even powerful NSS was not copyable due to weak signals and QRM from European commercial stations. Eventually, the change of seasons caught up with and passed the Bowen as it proceeded north, so that the sun once again set, spending about 3 hours below the horizon by late August. Though two-way contacts continued only sporadically, the ones between WNP and 1ANA in Chatham, Massachusetts, were most impressive. They spanned 2,500 miles when the expedition was within 50 miles of its destination, with midsummer daylight conditions presiding over a major portion of the route. R.B. Bourne, 1ANA, a receiving engineer at RCA, handled most of the reports from the Macmillan expedition during the first few months. He used an unconventional antenna, a tilted inverted L consisting of a 45-foot section angling upwards and away from his 100-foot steel tower, connected to a 70-foot top section angling up in the opposite direction, where it terminated into an insulator at the top of the tower, which was connected to station ground. In effect, this made it a huge single-turn triangular loop with an insulated break at the top, which acted like a condenser in series. The transmitter, located in a small windowless beach hut just big enough for the equipment, was a single 50-watt tube driving the antenna on 185 meters. He used a Reinhardt's receiver that was modified to be capable of tuning down to 75 meters. Its antenna was simply a 60-foot long wire 30 feet in the air. From the receiving station located several hundred feet away, the transmitter was controlled by a single wire with ground return, which drove two relays. This permitted a kind of break-in operation that was not at all what we would call QSK today. A momentary tap of the key through a polarized relay which applied plate and filament voltage to the transmitter. The plate voltage did not appear immediately, since a high-voltage vacuum tube rectifier was used and took time to warm up. Once things were heated and ready, subsequent keying applied voltage to the primary of the plate supply transformer via the second relay. When transmission was over, a second key sent a reverse polarity voltage to the keying line, which then toggled the polarized relay off. Persistence had paid off for 1ANA, who did not have a particularly powerful or elaborate station, but more importantly was a good operator who has the patience to sit and listen, wrote ARRL traffic manager Fred Schnell. He believed that this testimonial to operator skill would inspire others to get on the air and listen more carefully as winter approached and conditions gradually improved. We'll continue this segment next week. Included in this material are quotes from the following: J.K. Bowles, Arctic Explorer to Communicate with Amateurs, QST, June 1923, page 9. K.B. Warner, Amateur Radio Shoves Off for the Pole, QST, July 1923, page 7. Who's Who in Amateur Wireless, QST, August 1923, page 52. Strays, QST, August 1922, page 55. S. Cruz, Station WNP on board the Bowen, QST, July 1923, page 9. K.B. Warner, The Departure of WNP, QST, August 1923, page 16. F. H. Schnell, Have You Heard or Worked WNP, QST, September 1923, page 14. DH Mix, My Radio Experience in the Far North, QST, November 1924, page 17. Wireless North Pole, editorial, QST, October 1923, page 29. Amateur Radio Stations, QST, November 1923, page 57. With our appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for permitting us to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, in the preparation of this segment, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. The pursuit of amateur radio is a glorious thing. On the face of it, you're forgiven if you think of it as a purely technical endeavour. Far be it from me to dissuade you from that notion, but permit me to expand into other areas that rarely get a mention when we discuss this amazing hobby. It's the place where you go to communicate with other people who live a different life, doing the things that they enjoy. It's also the place for finding an excuse to go outside and set up your station on the side of a mountain, or a park, a museum, or a lighthouse. Then there's the joy of finding new friends who introduce you to other aspects of life. Supercomputing, the medical field, tow truck driving, radio astronomy, and electronics, to name a few. While I was the first person in my school to save up their summer job earnings to buy their own computer, a Commodore VIC-20, I never did come across this. It is pitch black. You are likely to be eaten by a grue. Is a phrase that might mean something to you, or not. To set the stage, it's the 1960s. You're a science fiction author and you need a ravenous predator. With origins in Danish and Norwegian, grue, from gruesome, seemed to fit the bill for Jack Vance while he was writing his Dying Earth series. Mind you, Robert Louis Stevenson used it in 1916 in a short story called The Waif Woman, writing, "And a grue took hold upon her flesh," which is more gruesome than predator. Flash forward to 1977. You're writing an adventure game for a PDP-10 mainframe computer, whilst, let's call it, studying at MIT, and you need a way to stop people wandering off the map, and so the text adventure game Zork got its famous phrase. I'm mentioning this because I've wondered if anyone had used their love for Zork as an excuse to set up a server on HF radio that you could play with. I'll confess that I spent way too many hours looking at this, and it appears that you can use the software Direwolf as a way to get packet radio to work across amateur radio without needing anything more than a radio and a computer with a sound card. There's even an article by Rick Osgood titled How to Set Up a Raspberry Pi Packet Radio Node with Zork, although I will mention that it relies on hardware to connect to a radio rather than use Direwolf. There's a few moving parts, but it looks like this is totally doable. There's already Docker containers for both Zork and Direwolf, even a container called Packet Zork, and a multi-user version called MultiZork. So how hard can it be? I jest. As an aside, because I'm a geek and I can, there's a common misconception that a Docker container is equivalent to a virtual machine. For lots of reasons, that's not true. A better way to think of it is as a security wrapper around an untrusted application. Speaking of untrusted, while we're all essentially bipedal life forms with a similar set of attributes on a daily basis, we seem to discover more and more reasons to find fault or demonize differences. Contrast this within the global community of radio amateurs, where we have this weird activity that we all seem to share. I think that the most underreported, perhaps even undervalued aspect of our hobby is that it's an excuse to talk to someone else. It's like a force of attraction, the glue, the one starting point that you know another amateur has in common with you. So next time you venture outside, either in real life or virtually, consider at least for a moment that there are other radio amateurs among us, also having fun. I'm Mono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima Alpha Bravo.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. As Hades ICM, or SO-125 as it is known, has been turned on for continuous ham use, there have been reports of operators successfully using it from around the world. Should you wish to give it a try, the uplink is 145.875 MegaHertz, and the downlink is 436.666 MegaHertz, both FM. From Suryono YD0NXX and N5SNN, we have learned that IO-86 turned 10 years old on September 28th. The satellite was designed to last only 2 years. Suryono also noted that the FM voice repeater is still working well and the APRS digipeater is showing reduced sensitivity. He noted that the satellite has been virtually problem-free. Here is looking at another 10 or more years of service to the ham community. Congratulations to Alexandra 9A1CAL for being the first to earn the ARRL DXCC with satellite endorsement from Croatia. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report. Just ahead in radio sport this week on October 4th and 5th, it's the Collegian QSO Party. Also on the 4th and 5th, the Oceania DX Contest, that's phone. October 4th and 5th as well, the California QSO Party, CW and phone. October 5th, the UBA ON Contest, 8040, that's phone. October 8th, the 432 MHz Fall Sprint, CW phone and digital. And on October 10th, it's the 1010 International 1010 Day Sprint, CW phone and digital. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on October 4th, it's the Wichita Area Hamfest hosting the ARRL Kansas Section Convention. That's in Wichita, Kansas. October 4th, the Rock Hill Hamfest hosting the ARRL South Carolina Section Convention. That's in Rock Hill, South Carolina. October 10th through the 12th, Pacificon hosting the ARRL Pacific Division Convention. That's in San Ramon, California. And remember to check the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find more events in your area. The Kingsport Amateur Radio Club in Kingsport, Tennessee will be hosting a special event at the historic Netherland Inn in Kingsport on October 18th, 2025. Special event station N4I will be in operation from 1400 Zulu to 1900 Zulu on 7.185, 14.275, 28.350, and 14.300 megahertz. The Netherland Inn, located along the Holston River, served as the migratory spot for settlers to build boats for their westward trip during the mid-1700s. A QSL card will be available.
Autumn weather can be very tricky in the part of Kentucky that the Princeton Ham Radio Club, W4KBL, calls home. Area residents who rely on weather radios, the ones that receive alerts and warnings from the National Weather Service, often say those receivers can be tricky too. Sam Gray, KJ4TYE, the club's vice president and weather coordinator, said that's what inspired members to host a weather radio session recently. They showed local residents how to program their radios properly so they don't miss relevant weather watches and warnings in and around Caldwell County. Sam went on to say, I have heard many people complain about the weather radio going off at all times for counties not close to them. He said those radios ultimately get unplugged and put into storage. When a disaster strikes, they have no warnings. That changed on Saturday, September 20th, when club members greeted radio owners inside the Emergency Operations Center to demonstrate how to properly program those radios so that they receive alerts relevant to their specific county. Sam said the club, which is heavily involved in weather spotting, knows the value of these kinds of alerts, but also knows that these radios, like many products these days, don't necessarily come with clear programming instructions in the box. Sam said he encourages other clubs to reach out in their communities to people confused by the programming instructions and help them to receive the right reports. He added receiving alerts and warnings is key to preparing and survival.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
For New Zealand's meteorologists, the Westland Rain Radar is transmitting only silence following a lightning strike of the 156 kiloamps that occurred on September 18th. A statement from Met Service New Zealand, the nation's weather service, said that the powerful surge was about 5 times greater than a typical strike and had sufficient power to run a residence for about 2 years. Various news reports said the power not only destroyed the weatherproof cover designed to protect the radar, but fried the electronics and overpowered the grounding systems at the site. The strike's destructive force had disabled the radar dome to the point that Met Service expects it to be out of service for an extended period while repairs are done. The radar is a critical forecasting tool for New Zealand's service weather warnings and plays an extremely important role for communities on the West Coast. Meteorologists, in the meantime, will be observing high-resolution computer models, satellite images, weather stations, and neighboring radar sites. According to a report on the AccuWeather website, this is not the first time the radar dome has been hit by lightning. A hit in 2022 left it with only minor damage.
When there's an emergency, you can't have too many ways to communicate, particularly when the crisis involves nuclear material. And that's why here in the U.S., the Department of Energy recently asked amateur radio operators to be part of a drill at a plant where the agency conducts nuclear waste management. It was the first foray in amateur radio emergency service in Paducah, Kentucky, responding to a mock emergency at a government-owned site that conducts nuclear deactivations and spent fuel cleanup. Paducah has more than 100 government sites across the country handled by the Energy Department's Emergency Management Program, which concludes and conducts nuclear remediation. The hams, the first responders at numerous natural disasters throughout Kentucky, are now providing backup in a nuclear scenario. According to a report of the department's website, the hams got the word out, successfully transmitting emails over the radio from their mobile station inside a truck, reaching department headquarters in Washington, D.C., as well as a project office in nearby Kentucky. Myrna Redfield, program manager of the Four Rivers Nuclear Partnership, said this was the first time the inclusion of amateur radio meant that such scenarios gave an extra layer of resiliency to keep communications uninterrupted. She said exercises like this not only enhance our preparedness, but also strengthen ties with local responders who share their commitment to protecting people and the environment.
In a move applauded by a number of lawmakers, the Federal Communications Commission has given prisons and other correctional facilities the authorization to use cell phone jamming technology to disable devices smuggled into inmates. Federal law prohibits the sale and operation of equipment that interferes with the operation of authorized radio communications, including GPS and cellular phones. According to the FCC, the September 30th vote was taken to halt what authorities say are criminal activities, such as drug dealing or killings, being conducted by persons who are incarcerated. The FCC said that its action would coordinate efforts between corrections officials and wireless carriers and is not designed to interfere with wireless services of cellular customers in the vicinity of the prisons. The move drew praise from a number of lawmakers, such as David Kustoff, a Republican congressman who in March had introduced the Cell Phone Jamming Reform Act of 2025.
It is time once again for our weekly look at solar weather and the terrestrial propagation forecast. Solar activity, which has been at low levels, has returned to moderate levels. Region 4232 produced the largest event of the period, an impulsive M3.6 minor flare on October 1, 2025. An associated coronal mass ejection was observed in subsequent SOHO-LASCO coronagraph imagery beginning on September 29. Analysis and modeling of the ejecta is ongoing. Newly numbered Region 4237 remained relatively quiet as it developed. Region 4263 also produced an R1 event with a flare near the end of the reporting period. It is important to note that, after careful assessment of recent magnetograph imagery, a spot previously associated to Region 4239 is now considered part of the 4230, explaining its reported size increase. A new region appeared but remained unnumbered until further observation. With multiple regions continuing to exhibit growth, flare activity is likely to remain at moderate levels with a slight chance for an X-class strong flare through October 30th. Weak enhancements in the solar wind environment, beginning September 29th, are likely to continue as influence from a negative polarity coronal hole high-speed stream persists. The coronal hole high-speed stream influences on the solar wind conditions near Earth are expected to persist through October 5th, as the planet continues to be embedded at the coronal hole-associated corotating interactive region. A recurrent negative coronal hole was observed rotating into the east limb of the visible solar disk during the period, but no impact is expected from it in the upcoming days. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the vocap online for ham radio website.
The largest celebration of space is right here on planet Earth, and it's taking place from the 4th through to the 10th of October. More than 90 countries are supporting this celebration of science and technology, which this year has the theme Living in Space. Ham radio operators, of course, keep their feet on the ground, mostly, but have at least one ear tuned to what's going on high above us. So amateur radio on the International Space Station will deliver its own contribution to this annual event by transmitting 6 unique slow-scan TV images. Right now the schedule is tentative, but there will be a window for transmission on Friday, October 3rd, and a second window with the same images on Saturday, October 4th. The action will be happening on 145.800 MegaHertz, where the images will be sent in PD-120 encoding. World Space Week is an educational effort that was declared by the United Nations in 1999. The observance gives nations around the world an opportunity to show how space-related initiatives have the capacity to improve life on Earth. Meanwhile, be sure to listen as well for special event station GB2WSW, which is celebrating World Space Week by being on the air on 40-meter single sideband and 20-meter FT8, from 1000 to 1600 UTC, from the 4th through to the 10th of October. The station will be operating from a school in Surrey, England, where it will also be receiving the SSTV images from the ISS to show the students.
Data centers and the electrification of devices that previously ran on fossil fuels is driving increased demand for electricity around the world. China is addressing this with a mega project that is a new spin on their most famous piece of infrastructure. At 250 miles long and 3 miles wide, with a generating capacity of 100 gigawatts, the Great Solar Wall will be able to provide enough energy to power Beijing, although the energy will more likely be used to power industrial operation and present in the Kabuki Desert. NASA states Kabuki's sunny weather, flat terrain, and proximity to industrial centers makes it a desirable location for solar power generation. As an added bonus, previous solar installations in China have shown that they can help combat further desertification by locking dunes in place and providing shade for plants to grow. Engineers must be having fun with the project, as they've also designed the Guinness World Record holder for the largest image made of solar panels with the Junma Solar Power Station, which they made in the shape of a horse. The Great Solar Wall is expected to be completed by 2030, with 5.5 gigawatts already installed in 2024.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
The program for Radio Society of Great Britain 2025 convention has nearly 50 presentations for you to enjoy, including leading industry speakers such as Mike Walker, Victor Alpha 3, Mike Whiskey from Flex Radio, and Hans Summers, Golf Zero Uniform, Papa Lima from QRP Labs. There will be well-known names such as Neil Smith, Golf 4, Delta Bravo November, Radcom Technical Editor Peter DeFay Smith, Golf Mike 3 X-Ray Juliet Echo, Brian Coleman, Golf 4 November Sierra, and Walt Hudson, Kilo 4 Oscar Golf Oscar, known to many as Salty Walt. This annual RSGB event is your only opportunity within the UK to have access to this level of knowledge, learning, and networking opportunities. As well as a packed full lecture program, there will be nearly 20 special interest groups in attendance. So if you're thinking of pursuing a different area of the hobby, this is the perfect time to explore your options. To guarantee a place, you will need to purchase a ticket online before advance sales close on Sunday, October 5th, 2025. Buying your ticket online not only guarantees your place, but it also saves you money when compared to at-the-door ticket prices. If you are arriving on Friday, why not join a private tour of Bletchley Park at 2:30 p.m., which has been arranged especially for convention attendees. In addition to this, and new for this year, RSGB National Radio Center volunteer Patrick 2 Echo 0 India Foxtrot Bravo will be running an informal introduction on getting started with low Earth orbiting satellites. The RSGB convention takes place from October 10th through the 12th, 2025 at Kents Hill Conference Center in Milton Keynes in the United Kingdom.
Amateur radio is a national resource before and when all else fails. During National Preparedness Month in September, ARRL shared resilience tools and frameworks with hams. In October, it is the time to assess amateur radio's readiness via the ARRL Simulated Emergency Test, or SET. Each ARRL section will have a different scenario that puts equipment, operators, and plans to the test. This nationwide exercise is the chance to test your personal emergency operating skills and the readiness of your communications equipment and accessories in a simulated emergency, like deployment, said ARRL Director of Emergency Management Josh Johnston, KE5MHV. ARRL field organization leaders at the section and local levels, and many other volunteers who are active in public service and emergency communications, are developing simulated emergency-like scenarios in consultation with a variety of agencies and organizations for whom radio amateurs are known to provide services during emergencies. Find more information about the SET. Visit www.arrl.org/simulated-emergency-test. For information on getting involved in the ARRL Amateur Radio Emergency Service, visit www.arrl.org/ARES.
On October 10th, 2025, the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary will operate Special Event Station N2S to celebrate 86 years of serving the Coast Guard and America. Operating times are 22:59 UTC to 23:59 UTC on 14.31, 7.25, and 18.2 megahertz from a historic former Coast Guard station in Cape May, New Jersey, home of the United States Coast Guard basic training. Throughout its 86 years, the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary has been augmenting the Coast Guard through patrols, watch standing, culinary services, and enhancing the safety and security of our ports, waterways, and coastal regions. For more information, visit www.cgaux.org. Meanwhile, the Kingsport Amateur Radio Club in Kingsport, Tennessee, will be hosting a special event at the historic Netherland Inn in Kingsport on October 18, 2025. Special event station N4I will be in operation from 1400 UTC through 1900 UTC on 7.185, 14.275, and 28.35, and also 14.3 megahertz. The Netherland Inn, located along the Holston River, served as migratory spot for settlers to build boats for their westward trip during the mid-1700s. A QSL card will be available. For additional information, visit Kingsport Amateur Radio Club, supporting the art of amateur radio on the web.
The WOW at Home project, inspired by the famous WOW signal detected in 1977, is advancing its effort to establish a global network of small, software-defined radio telescopes dedicated to searching for transient astrophysical events and potential technosignatures. Testing of hardware and software continues, though progress has been slowed by a shortage of low-noise amplifiers, a key component expected back in stock later this month. Project organizers note that the original WOW signal was strong enough to have been detected by a modest home telescope, underscoring the scientific value of a distributed approach. A worldwide network of small radio telescopes offers distinct advantages compared to professional observatories. These low-cost systems can operate autonomously around the clock, providing continuous sky monitoring that large instruments cannot sustain. Distributed across different time zones, the network allows global coverage, coincident detection of events, and rapid response to alerts. The approach is scalable, resilient, and accessible, making it ideal for education, citizen science, and wider participation in radio astronomy. The prototype WOW at Home telescope is a Meridian-style system modeled after the Big Ear telescope used in the Ohio State SETI project. With a fixed elevation and a wide 25-degree beam, the telescope surveys a full 360-degree strip of sky each day as the Earth rotates. Over time, multiple passes yield full sky coverage. While sensitivity is lower than professional instruments, this design provides valuable data on radio frequency interference, RFI, near the hydrogen line and creates a platform for detecting strong transient events. Central to the project is the WOW at Home software, now under development. Built initially in interactive data language and later to be translated to Python for broader access, the software acquires and analyzes data to identify transient events and reject RFI. Early test results include signal-to-noise plots, hydrogen spectral profiles of the galactic center, and narrowband event detections. A unique retro display option is also being developed to recreate the printout style of the original Ohio SETI experiments, connecting modern work to its historic roots. The WOW at Home network is not an interferometer and does not measure polarization at this stage. Its strength lies in continuous distributed monitoring for signals lasting from seconds to days. Coordinated observations across multiple sites can confirm weak or short-lived events, eliminate local interference, and provide complementary coverage to large observatories. Recent discoveries of fast radio bursts and long-period transients illustrate the types of phenomena that modest instruments may detect if deployed widely. Looking ahead, organizers estimate that at least 114 telescopes are required for basic sky coverage, with about 342 needed for effective redundancy and RFI rejection. At a cost of roughly $500 per station, the full network could be established for under $200,000, far less than a single professional facility. A public version of the WOW at Home software is expected by late 2025 or early 2026. Volunteers with expertise in RFI mitigation, graphical interfaces, or app development are encouraged to contribute.
Organizers of the Pennsylvania QSO Party are extending a big invitation to hams throughout the United States, Canada, and the Caribbean to assist their fellow amateurs in the Keystone State. The Pennsylvania QSO Party is held on the second weekend of October, running this year on October 11th and 12th, with stations found on both SSB and CW. It has the reputation as the friendly QSO party because it attracts lots of newcomers and casual operators who take their time on the QSO exchanges. Now it's become even friendlier. The committee that oversees the Pennsylvania Party has introduced a new group of awards and plaques for this contest to stimulate even more activity, especially on the 10, 15, and 20-meter bands. That's where those of you outside of Pennsylvania become part of the winning formula for Pennsylvania stations who will be looking for you. Even if you're not into contesting, nearly all of us who cruise the bands on the weekends are generally willing to stop to make contact with a station calling CQ. Well, that brief stop for a Pennsylvania station during this event could translate into big rewards. While the Pennsylvania Party does offer plaques and awards to out-of-state stations in a variety of categories, organizers want to promote even more activity from those stations. Doing so will help operators in Pennsylvania to capture awards for sweeping sections and call districts in the Northeast, Southwest, the West, Central, Canada, and some DX, plus the Caribbean.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
It's time for this week's AMSAT satellite shorts from all over, and this week, well, they're really short, so here we go. Due to FO-29's battery status, the satellite remains active following the activation times until the satellite's undervoltage control shuts the transponder off. Satellite de-expeditions to PJ7 Saint Martin and FP Saint Pierre and Equatorial over the past week were successful, with PJ7K and FP5KE making numerous satellite QSOs. AO123's FM transponder returned to service this past week. The uplink is 145.85 MegaHertz with 67 Hz CTCSS tone, and the downlink is 435.400 MegaHertz. And finally, AMSAT-EA has announced that SO125's FM transponder will now be left on full-time. The uplink for SO125 is 145.875 MegaHertz carrier squelch, no tone needed, and the downlink is 435.666 MegaHertz.
The International Space Station has been in orbit around the Earth, at least in sun form, since November of 1998, but not without help. In the vacuum of space, an object in orbit can generally be counted on to remain zipping around more or less forever, but the station is low enough to experience a bit of atmospheric drag, causing its orbit to decay. It isn't much, but it saps enough velocity from the station that without regular reboost to speed it back up, the orbiting complex would eventually come crashing down. Earlier this month, a specially modified SpaceX Cargo Dragon became the newest addition to the list of spacecraft that can perform a reboost. The craft will boost the station several times over the rest of the year, which will provide valuable data for when it comes time to reverse the process and deorbit the ISS in the future. To make reboosting with the Dragon possible, SpaceX has added additional propellant tanks and a pair of rear-firing Draco thrusters within the spacecraft in the unpressurized trunk module. This hollow structure is usually empty, but occasionally will hold large or bulky cargo that can't fit inside the spacecraft itself. It also occasionally has been used to deliver components destined to be mounted on the outside of the space station, such as the International Docking Adapter and the rollout solar panel. While the ability to have the Dragon raise the orbit of the International Space Station obviously has value to NASA, the implications of this experiment go a bit further. SpaceX has already been awarded the contract to develop and operate the deorbit vehicle, which will ultimately be used to slow down the station and put it on a targeted re-entry trajectory sometime after 2030. Now that the company has demonstrated the ability to add additional thrusters and propellant to a standard Dragon spacecraft via a module installed in the trunk, it's likely the deorbit vehicle will take a similar form. So while the development of this new capability is exciting from an operational standpoint, especially given deteriorating relationships with Russia, it's also a reminder that the orbiting laboratory is entering its final days.
In August, the AMSAT-SM group in Sweden issued an open letter to several major amateur radio manufacturers calling for the development of a new handheld transceiver with true full duplex capability. The initiative, led by Lars Thunberg, SM0TGU, highlights the strong demand within the satellite operating community for modern equipment that supports simultaneous transmit and receive on different bands without descents. The letter was sent to a dozen manufacturers, including ICOM, Kenwood, Yaesu, Alinco, Biofung, TYT, Waxon, Rativis, Anytone, QIT, Radtel, and Vero Telecom. These companies represent both long-established Japanese firms and newer Chinese brands that have introduced a wide variety of handhelds in recent years. While today's radio often features APRS, GPS, Bluetooth, and USB-C charging, none currently provide the full duplex FM capability needed for effective satellite operation. AMSAT-SM emphasized that full duplex operation is vital for amateur satellite use, allowing operators to hear their own downlink while transmitting. This feature was present in older, now discontinued models, such as the Kenwood THD-72, but is missing from all currently produced handhelds. The group argued that satellite operators would be willing to pay a premium for this capability, and that manufacturers could capture a unique market by stepping into this space. Among the minimum technical requirements outlined were extended filtering between the VHF and UHF bands, robust descent protection, support for both memory and VFO operation in duplex mode, CTCSS subtone transmission, and a rugged external antenna connector for portable Yagi antenna use. Practical considerations such as USB-C charging, selectable power output up to 5 watts, and energy-efficient design for longer battery life were also highlighted as priorities. AMSAT-SM further suggested several nice-to-have features that could broaden the radio's appeal. These include APRS with GPS, Bluetooth support for wireless handsets, and computer connectivity over Bluetooth for channel programming and Doppler control. The group specifically recommended implementing the CAT protocol over Bluetooth, which would allow operators to use existing satellite tracking and Doppler correction software without proprietary apps. As of August 30th, AMSAT-SM reported that 3 of the 12 manufacturers contacted had responded to their appeal, with one company moving forward in discussions. While details remain confidential, the group encouraged operators to stay tuned for updates. The effort reflects both the continuing innovation within the amateur satellite community and the strong desire for modern, purpose-built equipment to support space-based communications.
Registration for the 2025 AMSAT Symposium, to be held October 17th through the 19th, continues. A reminder that proposals for symposium papers and presentations are invited on any topic of interest to the amateur community. We request a tentative title for your paper or presentation as soon as possible, with the final copy submitted by October 8 for inclusion in the symposium proceedings. Proposals should be sent to Frank Karnauskas, N1UW, via fkarnauskas@amsat.org. Meanwhile, AMSAT-DL hosted its annual symposium on September 19th through the 21st. Prior to the opening of the symposium, AMSAT-DL hosted a meeting regarding the futureGEO project. The futureGEO project is a prospective geostationary amateur radio station hosted on a satellite with coverage including portions of North America. AMSAT was represented at this meeting by Vice President of Operations Drew Glasenbrenner, K04MA. AMSAT-DL Symposium included presentations on futureGEO projects, as well as other updates on various amateur satellite-related projects.
October 5th through October 11th, a special Canadian annual event will be promoting fire safety during Fire Prevention Week. Stations usually participating include KF2IRE, N1F through N9F, and VA3FIRE from Ontario. A printable certificate is available from hamfire.com, where the event information is. VA3 Fire is a wildcard station that can help with earning that certificate. The various stations spot themselves on DX Summit, and as it is not a contest, stations can be found on most HF bands working SSB and some FT8.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
The following have been elected to serve on the AMSAT Board of Directors: Drew Glassbrenner, KO4MA, with 261 votes, Jerry Buxton, N0JY, with 254 votes, Barry Baines, WD4ASW, with 245 votes, and Frank Karnauskas, N1UW, with 232 votes. And elected as alternate director, Douglas Tabor, N6UA, with 213 votes. The AMSAT Board of Directors is responsible for setting the organization's strategic direction, overseeing satellite projects and operations, supporting educational outreach, and fostering collaboration with partners worldwide. The board ensures that AMSAT continues to fulfill its mission of advancing amateur radio in space for the benefit of members and the broader amateur radio community.
And our final story this week. A 17-year-old radio amateur from rural Malawi has joined the DXpedition team that is headed to Andaman and Nicobar Island in the Bay of Bengal in October of 2026. Urgent Gir, 7Q6UJ, is not just along for the ride. Barely a year after passing his U.S. technician exam, he has already confirmed 168 DXCC countries as a chaser. Soon, he will be on the other end of that envious pileup. He is studying to upgrade his license and sharpening his proficiency in CW. Urgent was mentored by Don Jones, 7Q6M, K6ZO, as part of a project created by Hack DC Amateur Radio Club of Washington, D.C., and supported by the Jeffrey Dahm Memorial Foundation. Urgent hopes his efforts will inspire other young people in Africa to embrace amateur radio too. One of Urgent's next trips after India will not be to a DXpedition, but to an even longer journey that will shape the rest of his life. He plans to go to the U.S., where he hopes to combine academic studies with radio science at Virginia Tech University.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard all around the world on the amateur bands, and on great repeater systems like the KB3 CNN Gateway FM Association repeater, on 146.730 MHz every Tuesday evening at 7:30 p.m., covering the wide area of western Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. If your repeater system carries This Week in Amateur Radio, let us know via email, and we will mention your station in an upcoming edition. Send your information to w2xbs77@gmail.com.
Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio here on our network flagship repeater, K2RHI. We would like to take this opportunity to thank K2RHI for use of the repeater to bring the greater capital area amateur operators this informative weekly news service. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you 73.